Everybody, and welcome to this week's lore chat. Today is February the 12th, 2022. We are going to be talking about the war, the big conflict between the East and the West, the Glacian Empire, and all of the other free peoples of the world. If you tuned in to part one, then you already got a little bit of a listen on more or less the meaning of the war. It has to do with self-governance and self-determination. People who think they should rule over others, and people who think, no, I should be in charge of choosing my own destiny, thank you. So it's the forces of imposed order versus the forces of natural order. And we also have, of course, the forces of chaos mixed in here as well. You'll find things are not always kind, good things aren't always happening to good people, as you will see. And honestly, the most common way that this conflict between imposed and natural order manifests itself in Atheros throughout the ages is slavery. Of course, we see many different systems of oppression throughout the histories, but the conflict between the slaveholders and the abolitionists is really the core of the war that we're going to be talking about right now. So we left off part one talking about a few things, mostly what was going on towards the end of 1500, 1600 Second Era. The first thing that we should note is we were talking about, at that time, Captain Rourke and the founding of Rourkehold for the Tholian mission and the Thuppish peoples. Mount Gomrin, you can see it right now in the center of the map there, with Lake Bomp just next to it, just beside it. And also there's the city of Bohm, kind of in its western foothill there. The city of Rourkehold was founded on the eastern side of the mountain. So just in that little pass between Lake Bomp and Mount Gomrin, that's where Rourkehold is. And one other thing to note too, the event that moves Mount Gomrin to where it is from its original location, which is where that little circle is to the left there, if you follow that cap. That event has yet to happen. So as you're thinking about what's happening here and what's about to go on as Glacia is resurrected, and as Carden Rourke had that prescient thought of, she's about to wake up, we need to build this city to defend ourselves, like Rourkehold right there, kind of just south of where that H is and where it says Gomrin Highlands, that would have been its original location. So it would have been right there on Glacia's doorstep at Castle Blatt, ready to defend the Thuppish territory to the south from any incursions by Glacia or her people, the Frost Raiders. At that time, that's who they suspected would go at it anyways.
Ron?
Yeah?
Where am I supposed to be seeing the map and the cursor?
It is on the recording. If you take a look, yes, at least as far as when I'm giving locations, as far as the center of the map, that is what I'm talking about. If you just pull up the map in Lore Links, you can see these here. But I'm right now just using the map from Lore Links and just zooming in on it. Rourkehold, as I said, it is not on this map. I realized that as I was doing the research for this week's lore call, but it should be on this map. And its location is, its current location is just sandwiched right between Lake Bomp and Mount Gomrin, right in that tiny little pass there. And its previous location would have been still right there, kind of attached to the mountain, just zoomed over about 2 miles or so to the left, under where it says Gomrin Highlands. Okay, thanks. All right, so continuing on here, let's see, just pulling this back up. All right, so we left off talking about Carden Rourke's advice, the formation of Rourkehold, The gold reserves are dangerously low bit. And then also the Akaikas beginning to recruit widely from all races. One other thing, though, that we should note is that this was also the time that the Crimson King and the Sonari appeared. The Ashwind Isles appeared down south in the Boiling Sea. Very little animal life or anything else down there except for, lots of fish and lots of nice dirt to grow farm in. And then almost immediately after, the Crimson King, along with the rest of his outcasts and exiles from their homeland, appeared on the Ashwind Isles. And this is probably, their appearance at this time is one of the reasons, I think, why they were able to kind of float under the radar of so many of the other forces. Because really, they have a lot of cultural philosophies that put them at odds with the forces of both the East and the West. But their appearance at this time is totally overshadowed by the reemergence of Glacia. So they kind of manage to just appear and then start taking up, again, more space in those different vacuums as they continue to appear during the war. We'll go over those as they're relevant, but it is at least relevant to note this is when the Sonari emerge and appear in the Ashwind Isles. Okay, so moving on. 1600 Second Era. Here we go. Glacia finally wakes up. The hole-in-the-ground strategy isn't working anymore. You can go listen to part 1 if you need a refresher on what that was. The Exodites have gone. They have left. So the Thuppish people no longer have enough money to just create, to put into the ground. So Glacia, she wakes up. She realizes at the end of the century, hey, this last century's tribute came up short. So she starts eating her way through Tharg until eventually she finds some people that are willing to work with her. And, once doing so, she gets an idea of what's the current geopolitical landscape of her dominion. Because remember, in Glacia's mind, everything belongs to her. She is the first. Everything else belongs to her. Every mountain, every grain of sand, every being. Even people, humanoids, hominids are property to Glacia. Just as we consider animals property, Glacia considers humanoids property. There's not, it's brutal. Of course, we as civilized modern human beings know that this is evil and not good stuff, but it also makes Glacia and her people good villains, which is one of the reasons why I made it. So, slavery is bad. Don't do stuff like that. Feel free to fight the slavers in D&D, though. Okay, so using a sliver of her treasury, Glacia realizes, hey, we're going to need more money coming in. She uses the money that she has now, at least a bit of it, to invest in the Tharg and in the Frost Giants, who are still... The Frost Giants are wholly loyal to her, and as are the Frost Raiders. The Tharg, slightly less so, but they're still willing to go and fight for her because she's willing to lure them in with the ability to test their martial skill at arms. Hey, you want to fight? You want to prove you're the best? Here's some money. I can provide you with the best armor, and I can reward you amply for your service. And it's pretty tempting to a lot of these Tharg. They take the deal. So she creates an order called the Cold Harvest. Now, they're slightly different from the Frost Raiders. The Frost Raiders is, okay, Frost Giants or Brooke. Brooke only Brooke can join. We go around, we bonk people on the head, we take slaves, we take riches, we bring those back to Glacia. We have lots of many tales of honor and glorious battle, and we get rank and prestige in the clan, and then we can have many children who can go and do the same thing. The Cold Harvest, they more or less have that same mandate to go out and get gold for Glacia, but it's a broader mandate in that it's not just Frost Giants. So Tharg can join, there's Tholians that are there, there's Hill Giants that are part of it as well. And another part, too, of the Cold Harvest's duty and authority is to manage the treasury for Glacia. So make sure that each year, not her whole treasury, I should say the tribute, manage the tribute for Glacia to make sure, hey, each year that the tribute is coming in from each city, that each clan in the Frost Giants is paying their share, and then they are also the ones responsible for making those foreign wars on other kings that need to be paying their tribute to Glacia, who is the one true rightful monarch of the area. So it's at this point that the Empire advances themselves in siege warfare. The Cold Harvest goes and basically takes these siege machines up to the walls of the cities or in the area and says, hey, you need to pay your tribute to Glacia, and if you don't, we're going to burn down your city. And that was a very effective means of extorting tribute from a lot of the rich and unprepared kingdoms of Atheros. Like, a lot of the larger ones were ready for a fight, but a lot of the smaller ones were easy pickings. And at this point, even though she was forming an empire, she had this bureaucratic state that was kind of starting to form. It wasn't immediate. This didn't happen right away. The Cold Harvest happened right away, kind of like in the first couple months of her awakening. But the Glacian Empire, that wasn't really truly formed underneath her until like maybe 10 or 20 years after she'd come up. Just because there was such a network of bureaucrats and valets and other people under her that needed some sort of legitimate political structure. Now keep in mind, the Glacian Empire is still far from being a modern political state, even insofar as they are right now in Atheros. But it still is a functioning state now. The old state was not a functioning state. It was just Glacia telling the Frost Raiders to go bring her gold, and they did that. She found some thup. They bonked them on the head, and brought her some gold, but it wasn't actually a functioning state. Now, though, this state was actually starting to form, and common law, written law, judges, everything like that. So you have the actual formation of the Glacian Empire occurring right here around 1600 Second Era. It's about this time, too, that Revax, he sees an opportunity, and again, he's not in charge of the Iron Hearts, but he can influence them and what's going on with them a lot, almost entirely. So the Iron Hearts, they start to apply some pressure and persuasion with the emergence of Glacia to have slave markets opened in some of the different areas of Atheros. So these slave markets, they are opened in the Vestian Peninsula. They're also opened in Revetic, and just pretty much broadly across Serpent culture. Castle Blatt, there's one open there, of course. There's one open on Glacia's doorstep. The Sonari also began a slave trade. Mahana, there's one there. And then the Frost Giant cities, just broadly, and also Narak cities, too, begin the slave trade. So, one other thing, too, to note about the Empire, and as it's forming right now, in its current state, it's not going out and subjugating these cities right now, a lot of these cities that it's conquering. It is instead favoring to just take tribute from them. So, hey, we sack you and take your gold, or you give us your gold, or we'll sack you. It's not necessarily creating client states yet. That will happen in the near future, though. This is also when the fortress city of Kasich is formed at the foot of the... There it is. At the foot of the Hadron mountain range, up to the north, just south of Barlak. I guess it's in the northwest, I should say. And it's used as a stronghold for the Cold Heart, and also for sympathizers of the Iron Heart. So it's more or less a trade stopover for people in the area, because Sword has yet to be founded. If you're looking at the current map, Sword isn't there just yet. So, moving on from there. The Iron Hearts, they expand their slave markets. They start kind of embedding themselves in with the Cold Harvest and with the Glacian Empire as allies. this this obviously presents a changing situation to the new mission and the Tholian Patriarchs. Okay, not just the reemergence of Glacia, right? Obviously, that is a bad, terrible thing. It's something they've been preparing for, and it's something that they don't want to see, but it is something that they're somewhat ready for. But this forming alliance now between the Cold Harvest and the Ironhearts, that's something that they really cannot tolerate. So the Tholian Patriarchs create an order called the New Mission. And the Tholian mission, it's more or less just a revival of the original Tholian mission. It's dedicated to the defense of freedom and equality. It's basically a militant form of their abolitionist policy. And it's not just wholly populated by Tharg this time. The Tharg were created, hey, defend us from Glacia so that when Glacia attacks, you can bonk her on the head, or defend us from the frost giants. The new mission, they're more broadly dedicated, okay, we fight freedom, we fight for equality, we fight no matter who's doing it, no matter where we are. So it's a more broader mandate, if you will, than just what the Tharg were doing before. And it's also a little bit more specific than just the whole Tholian mission of go around and have good times. It's also, by the way, this isn't really super relevant to the war, although actually it kind of is. It's at this time that the Glacian Empire, they as a whole are advanced, like in Dawn of Worlds terms, in cruelty. Look, they might not be as idealistic as other races, and individually they might not be as strong, but they also have absolutely no scruples about doing what they have to do to get their way. Torture, intimidation, like slavery is embedded into their everyday lives. What makes they don't care about your physical well-being. They don't care about your family's physical well-being. What they care about is pleasing their superior and making that quota. And they'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. So as we go on here and we start talking about some of the absolute tragedies, and I mean war crimes that are committed by the Empire, this is one of the reasons why. They were advanced in that cruelty, and to them it's a weapon. It's a weapon because it's something that breaks the morale of the enemy. It's something that they don't see coming necessarily, and yeah, it's harsh, but it's something they do. And then from there, the remaining Thup on Atheros, remember 80% of them left as Exodites, and there's only about 20% of them left now. The remaining ones congregate in the city of Drem, just to the east of Lake Bomp. So if you look at Lake Bomp there, Drem, just kind of due north of the confluence of the Bomp and the Everor rivers, it's right there. And they more or less throw themselves into brewing. At this point, almost all, like 50 to 75% of the remaining Thup are a part of the brewerhood at this point. At least if you're in Drem. It's just kind of like, hey, we have really nothing else to do. We're going to brew. That's what we do. So they start working on a lot of different projects, things like that. This advances the Ale of Life agenda, which we haven't really talked about, but is a thing. So meanwhile, this happens over the course of about the 100 years or so. In 1700, Second Era, time goes on. This is when chaos kind of rears its head, we'll say. There are three forces that attack three cities, and they are called Endbringers. They're these nigh unstoppable monstrosities that take many forms, that have many abilities, that kind of defy a set of classifications. It is only appropriate to call them unstoppable monstrosities. They are the Endbringers. One attacks the city of Lenarask, one attacks the city of Hanuamana, and one attacks the city of Rorkhold. Lenarask is attacked by a great golden Endbringer that's in the form of a perfectly physically sculpted Narak. And it causes the people there to go crazy. In its presence, also, the sea creatures obey its command, and they attack the city. Then, meanwhile, there's an Endbringer called the Simurgh. It appears, and it attacks Hanuamana. Well, it doesn't attack the people there directly. Instead, this massive sort of angelic figure flies over this city, and it causes the Keepers of the Flame who are congregated there, gathering the different scattered artifacts of Ahuhi-Teroa, causes them to lose their minds. A lot of them just shatter, and they instantly go insane and just start doing bad stuff. Other people are just scarred forever for life. This is why so many of the Keepers kind of have that like dark look in their eye, because so many of their number were here in Hanuamana, and those that survived were forever changed by this event. Their minds were destroyed by the Endbringer and were rebuilt by whatever willpower they could muster. And meanwhile, the city of Rorkhold, keep in mind it's still in that location to the west at this point, Rorkhold is devastated when attacked by this massive rock elemental, which chews through the Thargish defense force there, and also smashes the walls of the city. So why is this relevant to the war? For 3 reasons. The Golden One, when it corrupts the Narak to the north there in the city of Lenarask, it pushes them towards slavery. It pushes them to their study of mind control magic that they'll do later. So the Golden One attacking Lenarask is one of the things that helps to more or less push the Narak towards the authoritative side of the war, towards the west, if you will. The Simurgh attacking Hanuamana, this devastates the seat of the Keeper's power. Now, Ahuhi-Teroa and the Keepers, they were a strong allied force, one that would definitely stand by Kane and Makua, and if Spirit came back or whatever, if the chips were down, Ahuhi-Teroa could be counted on along with his Keepers to do the right thing. But now, the Simurgh has just devastated that seat of power. So they've been dealt this huge blow. So this strong force that isn't part of an alliance yet, because an alliance hasn't been officially formed. It's coming soon. Coming soon to a theater near you, but not yet. But the Keepers have been destroyed. So a strong linchpin of that alliance that could have provided great magical and artifice has been taken out almost overnight by this Endbringer. And then meanwhile, Rorkhold, that being devastated, puts it under immediate threat. I mean, this is kind of a more obvious one, right? Because we can see how the city is tied directly into the conflict. With Rorkhold devastated, and with the Glacian army working on siege weapons, it's easy pickings. If they don't immediately take care of this, it's going to be a problem. So, aside from that, that's pretty much all that happens during 1700 that's directly related to the war. Come 1800, the Cold Harvest does, at this point, have the strength to mount an attack. But surprisingly, they do not. They do not attack Rorkhold. Instead, they head for the city of Yggdrasil. Now, we see on the map now that Yggdrasil is a very large fortress city, surrounded by a large wall. These defensive fortifications have not been built at this point in the history yet. This is coming soon, again, to a theater near you. So when the Cold Harvest comes, they attack and they ransack the city of Yggdrasil. The Oglalan defenders outside make a brave stand, but ultimately they are crushed. This heroic defense of Yggdrasil, so that the peasants and others can escape with their lives, leaving their goods behind. It's kind of a big deal to the Oglala. The spirits that live out there in those plains, that's kind of where they get that progeniturgy and that ghost magic from. This isn't something that they just always had, right? These races get a lot of these powers over time. And this is more or less the birthplace of that power. It's the however many Oglaila making a final stand there. They know they're going to die. They're just buying time. But the Cold Harvest, they succeed. They ransack Yggdrasil. They stop short of razing the city, and they also don't occupy the city. Remember, they haven't entered that sort of client state mode yet. Glacia hasn't evolved in her thinking just yet. But they do recruit a lot of discontented Kaijin that are in the city. When the Oglaila brought the Kaijin here to help them build the city, they kind of cheated them a little bit when it was time to hand out the social pecking order credits, let's say. There was a lot of discontented Kaijin that said, hey, you know what? We're sick of being basically slaves over here to the Oglaila. We'll just join the Cold Harvest. We'll go join the Glacian military. We'll get paid and live the high life, live like fat cats. So we see at this time some Kaijin start to join the Glacian Empire. Now this is key because it's another sign of how we're seeing the Empire become more and more racially diverse over time, right? So they start to absorb yet another race into their number. It's not just the Brook anymore, right? It's not just a bunch of frost giants bonking Thup on the head. Or squishing Squish. Poor Squish. So that happened in Yggdrasil. If we look just to the east in the Abhan, we mentioned before that the Brewerhood was working on the Ale of Life. Well, with all the Thup congregating now there in Drem, they perfected the Ale of Life, and they used it on Nagamesh. Now, at this point, I don't know if we went into this in part 1, but Nagamesh, in the aftermath of the Karlach being defeated, was found and captured by Revax. Revax used his magic on it to have it just create zombies. So instead of creating live Ator, it created zombie Ator. And Revax, being the person that he is, decided to start using these as personal servants and slaves and toys and other things like that. So he's had Nagamesh for a couple hundred years now, basically just making himself a private zombie army of Ator. The Thup, being an elder race themselves, they know the Ator from way back. They know Nagamesh from way back. He was Thup's bro. They find this incredibly offensive. So they work together, the Brewerhood, they work together with the Tholian mission in order to sneak past Revax's defenses, some agents in, and they use the Ale of Life on Nagamesh. Manages to kill Nagamesh. Nagamesh gets resurrected, and ta-da. As a result, Revax loses part of his little zombie machine, right? So part of his power gets winnowed away there by the Allied forces. It also, the raising of Nagamesh to Everor also happens to have a side effect of creating vampirism. Some of the serpents in the area, and also some of the Izran and the other folk who live there too, some of the Akaikans and so forth, are cursed with vampirism. So this is where we get the source of vampirism, is the Brewerhood and the Tholian mission using the Ale of Life on Nagamesh to free it from Revax's clutches. This is relevant to the war, again, because it winnows away his ability to just make a zombie army. Bam, there you go. Meanwhile, the Keepers, they are trickling up to the north from Hanuamana into an Akaikan camp that's set up there. The Keepers of the Flame, they are for the most part Vahi. There are some non-Vahi among their numbers, but they were originally mostly Vahi priests. And the Akaika were also, originally Vahi priests, Takane. So there is some feeling of brotherhood there, or camaraderie, I guess is the better word. So the keepers who survived the attack by the Simurgh start trickling up north to the Achaecan camp there, more or less just hanging out, using it as a refuge. They don't really have anywhere else to go. So that's what they do. We also at this point, I guess I should have mentioned this while we were up looking at the Abhan, but we'll just pop on over there really quick. We also have the Green Camp. We can see there in the center now where it says Green City. This used to just be an Achaecan camp. This is the point when that becomes an officially full-fledged city, not just an Achaecan camp. So in Dawn of Worlds terms, it's a lot better. They're capable of raising armies, etc., other things like that. So Revax is definitely feeling the heat right now from different allied forces. Hey, the Achaika are building a camp right here. Meanwhile, the Thup and the Tholian mission are successfully managing to sneak into my base and take away my favorite toy. He's very upset by this, and he's feeling the pressure as well. All right, so moving ahead then to about 1900 Second Era. What's happening in this century? Things still aren't quite going totally off the rails yet, but obviously there's still pretty open conflict between powers in the East and the West. The Cold Harvest is out there. They're still taking slaves and power and not power, slaves and wealth, I guess I should say, wherever they can impress their power upon others. We have at this point the Sonar. They arrived in the Ashwind Isles, but they hadn't built a city yet. We now see them start to extend a sort of net of feudalism into the area, into the boiling sea there throughout those islands, and giving tribute to the king, to the Crimson King. They managed to create the City of Brass, which is made up of these large opulent palaces that flaunt wealth. It's pretty cool. So the Sonar, they're kind of starting to exert themselves at this point, a couple hundred years after appearing. I guess it's about 400 years or so. Okay. So, hang on. So it's at this point that Glacia is getting tired of a thorn in her side. And this one isn't on the final map either, because unlike the ruins of Gaidi Prime, there was like pretty much nothing left. But if we look at the map here, you can see the hills of Mork to the west. That's part of Glacia's territory at the time. Hard Glacia's territory, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That's where the Frost Raiders hang out. Right now, if we're looking on the map, we can see the cities of Sword, Plenty, and Shield. None of those cities existed at this time. We're just using this for locational purposes, right? Okay. If you were to draw a line directly between Sword and Shield, straight line between Sword and Shield, and now you start a line from the City of Plenty, and you just move it straight to the west into that line, that's pretty much the location of this Achaecan camp, okay? So again, just using this for location purposes. It doesn't really even exist anymore. We could probably put a little ruin marker there on this map, but it's not there anymore. Okay, location set. We're good. Glacia feels that the location of this camp is very much a threat to her power. It's directly between Castle Blatt and Barlac, kind of like her twin capitals, if you will, right? And she does not like it. So she sends the Cold Harvest out there to deal with it. Oh, hang on a second. I just... Where'd that go? Ah, here we go. Okay. So, first the emissaries come into the camp. They demand that the Achaecans there pay tribute to the Ice Empress. The Achaicans refuse. They maintain that nothing of value can be surrendered to the Empire. The emissaries are realizing, there's probably some clever wordplay here, but they aren't having it. They make their demand again, and the Achaicans then tell the emissaries that you can try, but your bones will be burned and turned to fertilizer. This is not a very good thing to tell Glacia's emissaries. They don't take that well. Glacia calls up on her veterans and the troops from both Blatt and Kasich, so basically the cities to the north and to the south, and has them converge on the camp. She gives them orders to spare no one, with zero interest of conscripting anybody there. She just doesn't see them as loyal. And she sees the location of that encampment as a serious threat to the Empire's solidarity. She's not going to put up with it. Like, she sees it as a geopolitical attack on her domain. Like, obviously, the whole continent is hers, right? But she's also aware of this steady creeping situation of there's loyalists and then there's those that are disloyal, and she needs to kill enough of the people that are disloyal so that everybody listens to her. Blah blah blah. Again, she's a dragon. She's smart. She's capable of thought, but she's also an ancient legendary dragon. She thinks in like a millennia time scale, right? It's her thought process evolves slowly because you are like the borders that we put on the map mean nothing to her. She's going to be around in another 5,000 years, right? So, anyways. The camp is completely obliterated. It's wiped out. There's nothing left of it. Camp go bye-bye. It's at this point that also in the 1900 second era in this century that the Narok start to actually experiment with mind control magic and slave control magic. They were influenced by that Endbringer attack 200 years ago when the Golden One hit Lenarask. And it's now when the Narok, particularly the ones in Lenarask, start to experiment with that kind of magic, the will control magic, if you will. Get it? If you will. Mind control, if you will. Okay, moving on. That terrible travesty against humanity. Finishing out this century, this is when Cardin Rourke uses his power in order to move the mountain. He's like, he's getting pretty upset with it. Oh, he also, I guess we forgot to go over this because I think this happens in the same century that the Endbringer appeared, that Rourkehold was under attack. But just going back for a quick second, sorry here. But in that same century, 1700 second era, when the Endbringer attacked Rourkehold, Rourke launched a counterattack, went into the center of Mount Gomran, found the elemental, and slew it. However, he was also mortally wounded in the fight. His heart would not survive. So, he took the heart out of the Endbringer and put it in his body. There we go. Bam, he's fine now, right? Well, the elemental also came from Mount Gomran. So he also has like a little bit of the mountain in his heart now, right? Over these couple hundred years since then, he's grown more and more in tune with the mountain. And he's grown kind of like to an avatar level. Slaying this beast is what got him to rise to that avatar level in the Dawn of Worlds terminology, but then also in the minds of the Tharg and the Thuppish people. Like, hey, you went down to the heart of the mountain, you slew the Endbringer, and now you're coming back up and helping us repair the city with the magic of the mountain. Dude, you're an avatar now. So 200 years later, he's managed to hone his focus and his control over the mountain, that he can move the whole thing. So he takes Mount Gomran for its current location right there in front of Castle Blatt, and he just moves the whole thing 250 miles to the west, creating right there, you can see that big kind of hole in the ground, that chasm. It's called the Forsaken Rift. people just don't come back from the Forsaken Rift. It's not like one of these entrances into the Underdark. It's like one of these epic level zone kind of things. You go down there, your tale is over. That's kind of just it, right? And this rift now separates the seat of Glacia's empire from basically a lot of the Thoplands. So this move by Rourke, moving the mountain like that, it's like, obviously, it's pretty damn cool, duh. But besides that, it's like a brilliant, like, feat of military engineering, I guess you could say, because he creates this defensive wall of this chasm between he and his enemy's territory, and still keeps the fortress of Mount Gomeron and Rourkehold kind of there in place and by the lake. So it really is a brilliant tactical move on his part. And again, it ties in with, we've talked about this in part one, that thuppish people mentality of make yourself the less attractive target. Like, look, we could go out there and fight, we could go out there and die, or we could just try to make ourselves the less attractive target and then strike the bad guy when we have the chance. Or, you know, winnow away at their willpower with our ale, and then they'll join our side, and we've got this kick-ass wall. You know, whatever it happens to be. But it goes in with that kind of thuppish, idiomatic behavior of, we could fight the bad guy, but we'll just kind of send him in these other people's direction. Good luck, other people. Yeah. Kind of, I mean, almost neutral behavior when it's framed that way, but at the same time, you gotta stay alive. So, still sounds like pretty neutral behavior. Anyways, so those are the major events of that century as they apply to this conflict here. The wiping out of that Achaecan camp in the foothills of Mork is probably the most major event. I mean, Yggdrasil was just sacked last century. Now the Achaecan camp has been razed to the ground. It seems like nowhere is safe right now. Like, who knows where Glacia's army is going to pop up next? Like, any guesses, you know? Like, you could even say, like, geez, where's the Cold Harvest going to come and ransack next? You can never expect where they're going to go. Just the shape of the Horseshoe Plains allows them to deploy very quickly to a lot of different places. And, you know, it's just yeesh. But now moving on here to 2000 Second Era, you have within the Ikaika and the Vahikane a schism occur. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of this schism. It's talked about in another lore call having to do with the Vahi, and also I think another one has to do with rulers and some other things. This is talked about in a few lore calls. But the long and the short of it is that there are a lot of traditionalists who believe that the Ikaika have strayed too far away from the priesthood of Kane, and they're just focusing on this militant abolitionism. And the Ikaika agree, and they like it that way. Kane steps in, and he splits this order in two, saying, okay, traditionalists, you are now this order of warrior priests, still to me, called the Vahikane, so you fulfill those traditional Ikaikan duties. And Ikaika, you keep the same name, but you are these new values. So you're going to be these new militant, anti-abolitionist values. This is when they become like truly a private military force with all these camps that they have around, and also no longer under the like direct command of Kane like the Vahikane are. So as the Vahikane are going back into their traditional ways, praying to Kane and thanking him for his gifts, one of them has a dark vision. Clouds go over the horizon, and the islands burn, and the dragon is laughing, "Wah, ha, 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 I told you so," and all that sort of stuff, right? Well, the priests take this vision very seriously. They think, well, we might be next. Glacia could be coming for us, right? Seems like every century there's a big attack. She could be coming for us next. So the Vahikane, they say, we need an alliance. It's not enough that each city just has its own army and we defend ourselves. Like, that is not enough. We need to actually come to each other's defense so that when Glacia attacks, we don't end up like Yggdrasil. We don't end up like an Achaecan camp. We don't end up wiped to the pages of history, or our children left parentless, or worse, enslaved. We can't let that happen. So they form what's called the Bond of the Rising Sun. That should sound familiar. That political entity still exists today, and Hanua is considered the de facto leader. At this time, the de facto leader was probably, well, it's not on here. It was probably Manalo. I can't believe Manalo's not on there. Probably because it's not an actual city, right? But that's where the priesthood's big temple is anyways. So that was probably the original cultural head of the bond, but by now the political head of the bond has shifted to Hanua. Anyways, the following cities all decided to get on board with the Bond of the Rising Sun. So there's Anu. Let's see if we can go over these one at a time here on the map. Anu. Okay, so it's just there on the north side of the Abhan Peninsula, kind of nearby Lemos, which does exist at this time in the history. There's Hanua. Of course, we all know Hanua. There it is right there. Mahana, down to the south here. At this point, still being somewhat rebuilt, although they haven't recaptured their former glory. They never will get there, but Kaho Ali's influence is still very strong in the city. Hang on, just lost track of my list. There it is. Mahina, which is over here on the Mahina Isle. There's also Manalo, which is the other capital of the Vahi. Just over there in the Eastern Ocean, I guess I should say, not over here. And then also 3 Nair cities join the alliance as well. The city of Kairun, the city of Typhoon, both of those are in the Eastern Ocean there, between the mainland and the Vahi Isles. And then also the city of... Oh, where'd it go? Yes, the city of Lemos. There it is, right there. It does exist at the time, and it's a part of the bond. So those cities form the backbone, at least the start, of the Bond of the Rising Sun. It's also at this point that Kane calls upon his people to raise a navy to defend them, wherever they might need to go. And the Vahikane also train and advance themselves in naval warfare. They realize, hey, if Glacia is going to come over here and threaten us, she has to do so by sea. And if our navy is better than hers, she will never make a landing on our islands. And in fact, they make it a point of pride that no Glacian soldier has ever stepped foot on one of the Vahi islands. This is when they get that good. The Vahikane at this point, at least as far as naval warfare on the waves and not below the waves, this is when the Vahikane really kick it into high gear, realizing that, hey, our lives, our children's lives, our entire, the destiny of our people, it's all on the line right now. We don't want to be slaves to the dragon. So meanwhile, what's Glacia doing? She is building up a navy for herself. She has over here a city called Basque. Now that city, hang on a second, I know I'm somewhere around here. Here we go. Oh no, here we go, it's Conquest. It's the city of Conquest, my mistake. So the city of Conquest starts churning out this huge navy at a rapid pace, intent on, there it is, there's Conquest, there we go. Castle Black Conquest. So they're just chopping up the forest and shipping the logs down the river, and then there's also the forest just to the north there. But she starts building a large navy in the city of Conquest. And she is intent on, indeed, attacking the Vahi Isles. The vision of the dark storm clouds were, in fact, true. And this is when really we see Glacia's arrogance betray her. In Dawn of Worlds, like just speaking out of character, like going back to the Dawn of Worlds thing, I do that sometimes in these talks. I could very easily see the Glacian Empire just stomping everybody, and I didn't want that to happen. I wanted there to actually be a chance for an alliance to be formed. So at the beginning of this round, at the beginning of this century, I tipped Chris, who's kind of the patron of the Vahi people, off to what was going to be happening. I said, hey, dude, I'm going to have Glacia attack with this navy. If you destroy her, she can be like, and it can be a point of arrogance and so forth, and that can allow her to start thinking a little bit more and start thinking in terms of the Empire, blah, blah, blah. And then you guys can be all cool because you destroyed Glacia's navy, and it can be this big defeat. Like, it can stop that string of attacks. Because out of character, I knew that I could just, okay, make more armies and crush these people, but it didn't seem right. You know, I wanted to actually play into the idiom of, hey, sometimes the bad guy gets arrogant. And in this case, that was what happened. It's that Glacia's a lot more arrogant than I was at this point, being the external storyteller, right? She's living her best life. She just sacked Yggdrasil. She just destroyed the Achaikans. There's nothing that can stand before her. Like, she's finally starting to believe in her head, like, haha, it took a couple hundred years, but finally Atheros is mine for the taking. Those stupid islands over there, that's the only thing that stands in my way. I'll just send a navy out there, we'll get a bunch of those little slaves, we'll bring them back here, and they'll dance and do their fire magic for me. It'll be fun. Ha 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 ha. Glacia doing evil things, you know. So she builds the navy, churns it out of conquest, and sends it out to the Vahi Islands. It's basically just a bunch of large ships, like all these like cruisers that are poorly constructed, they're poorly piloted. Like, her people, they've never built a navy before, they've never piloted ships, much less in the Eastern Ocean. Glacia sent her navy out there to try to conquer the island of Manalo. She thinks it's going to be an easy victory, and that once she has this, that'll be a stepping stone into controlling all of the underwater and the eastern races. Like, first Manalo, then the Nair, and then the whole world will be within my grasp. If you're familiar at all with Three Kingdoms, this is kind of like a Red Cliffs moment for Glacia, right? If she's Cao, she's so overconfident, she's gonna go down there, she's gonna crush those Southerners and that low-born Liu Bei. Just, you know, forget it. They're gonna done. I'm gonna go show that Matt Weaver what's what. But her arrogance gets the better of her. And Manalo, they see the navy coming, the Vahi Khane. They've had all this training and scouting. And every city in the Bond, except Kaerun, every city in the Bond commits forces to repelling Glacia's navy. Like, her navy is absolutely beaten to a pulp. Get it? Pulp. Ships are made of wood. By defending the Eastern Ocean. So it's like they're wiped out. Again, storyline-wise, they never stood a chance. They were meant to be defeated in the first place. It's a setup for that. But historically, this is a huge, huge moment for the Bond and for the forces of the East. It's like, gasp, Glacia can be defeated. She's not invincible. You don't have to just surrender when her armies show up. Like, yes, we individually, standing alone, we don't stand a chance. But if we all band together, if we all stand up together and we stop her, or at least we defend, we move into position when she attacks, we can defend ourselves. We might not be able to kill her, we might not be able to stop her right now, but we don't have to just bend knee to her. We don't just have to throw money at her to keep our cities from being razed. We can fight back. So this is a big moment for that alliance in the East. And this is even before the Thuppish peoples get on board, and before the Bellhold gets on board. So we can see that, like, the war now is starting to shift a little bit. it's at this point, too, Glacia goes off and licks her wounds. The only other real thing of note to point out in this century as it pertains to the war is that this is when those Thuppish peoples make the Grand Covenant official. I know I've mentioned it a couple of times or alluded to it, but it hasn't been formed yet. It is formed now. Basically, with the looming threat of the Glacian Empire, you have warming relations between all the Thuppish people. Between the Tharg and Rorkhold, even though they left. They left all the Thuppish people a little while ago to go sit in their fortress city. But they're still Thup. They're still our people. And then there's the Tholian matriarch, Lupa the Eighth. And then there's the Thuppish peoples as well. They're standing up against Revax and trying to do the right thing. They realize, hey, we have this common ancestry, we have this common cause, we should celebrate this common ancestry and common cause as Thup would want us to do, right? It is not enough simply to fight or to commit great acts or to have faith. We must also celebrate the good and the good times so that we have something to enjoy, so that we have something to fight for. So great representatives of all the Thuppish people, they gather to witness this event of all of these different bigwigs of the three Thuppish peoples coming together. And now, as they're all here on Mount Gomrin, they all gather there on the Holy Mountain, the cloud, which was once shaped like a cat, but Lessa took offense to and cursed, so that instead it always resembled not quite something. Now, the cloud shifts to momentarily clearly resemble Thup himself. So his spirit is within the cloud. You get what I'm saying here? All right, good. And his voice booms out loud. I praise thee, my people, for coming together of thine own will. I ask you remember your bonds of kinship, that your forebears once shared strong ale. The coming age may be dark. I have faith that with your will and love of good, you may weather these times and pass through them strong and free. So, my people, I bless your covenant, that the world might know good through you. He then exhales a holy breath upon the summit of Mount Gomrin, blessing their gathering with what would be known as the Grand Covenant. So the cloud then dissolves, no longer taking the shape of Thup. And the Thol, the Tharg, and the remaining Thup, they now stand together, united as one people, officially under the banner of Thup, the Grand Covenant. Before this, it was just, hey, there was the Thup. And then the Thol appeared. They walked around and spoke good news. That was good. Oh, and then there's bad people coming. We'll make the Tharg, and they'll defend us. Oh, but then they kind of moved out. Well, they're still homies. That's good. But now, the Grand Covenant exists. And it unifies all three of these people. The Thup that are in Drem, the Tharg and Rorkhold and in other fortresses around the place, and then also the Tholians spread pretty much all throughout the southwest there. All three of these people are now united under one political and religious banner. It is a religious state known as the Grand Covenant. And this is basically as a huge consolidation of power. I mean, this power block, like, it always existed nationally, right? Within the minds of all these people, and even within the minds of their enemies. But now it truly existed, and it had the blessing of Thup as well. It wasn't just the people coming together and saying, we're going to do this thing. No, it was them coming together saying, we're going to celebrate all of the virtues that we share. And then Thup said, you know what? You should really do this full time, guys. And they said, okay, we'll take that seriously. And they did. So we're getting towards the end of the talk, but there's still one more century to go through here. We're going to talk about 2100 Second Era. It's the last century of the Second Era. And we see here now a few things shifting. We've talked about Revax traditionally, so far anyways, being an enemy of the quote-unquote the East, right? He's always been an authoritarian. He enslaved the Izran people. He made a mockery of the Ator, right? And then used the defense of cultural heritage as an excuse for slavery. He's a despicable guy all around, right? But he's also starting to realize the threats around him. The Green City used to just be a little grass camp, right? Or just a little camp out there in the forest. Now it's a fully fledged Akaikan city with trade coming in and out of it, right? And the bond of the rising sun, now the Vahi and the Nair are allying with each other. And he does not feel comfortable right now. He feels like there's a lot of pressure all around him from these new like abolitionists, right? But he also doesn't want to attack directly. He sees Glacia over there, and he realizes what a great distraction Glacia makes. There are also a couple of other things fomenting in Revax's head right now. They have to do with being corrupted by the Karlach. But the long and the short of it is that he realizes, wait a second, I could stand by Glacia's side and die with her when this alliance crushes her. Or I could stand on the sidelines and kind of just continue gathering power. Revax isn't really interested in extending his reach imperial style, territory by territory by territory. He's more content with just ruling over the Abhan until he can take everything with one fell swoop, right? And he doesn't want any of his cities to be attacked. He doesn't want any more of these restrictive policies that hurt his ability to actually have a successful society. He wants to try to get on everybody's good side. At this point, he's going to try to start playing both sides. So there are zombies that have traditionally kind of roamed throughout the Abhan rainforest as a defensive measure against shenanigans. He instead, in this kind of basically a massive PR stunt, has his necromancers in an act of goodwill move all the zombies into this big wasteland where no one goes anyways. So now people can move around the Abhan a lot more freely. It's easier to trade, it's easier to move from one little camp to the other. It's more inviting to other non-serpent races. You see? So he's trying to be a little bit more friendly. And we have that friendliness also occurring in the Green City. Some of the serpent people start taking Revax's mandate to go out there, be friendly and everything seriously. And they start cohabitating with the Vahi there. And we start having fire snake births. So this is when we really start to see the fire snakes coming around. Like, for the 100 years before this, it is absolutely feasible that fire snakes were already born. Some existed, right? But this is when we start to see a lot more of them born, a much larger second generation, because it's more socially acceptable for the serpent people to have non-serpent partners. Before this point, it wasn't really. Some still did it, and there's still a minority, a small minority of serpents within that culture that find Revax and his ways distasteful and leave the forest. Those that do cohabitated with the Vahi in the Green City. That's where we get our first generation of fire snakes in the last century. But right now, this is where we get really the glut of the fire snakes, when they can actually be considered a true race in Atherosian terms. Not just there's one or two of them here or there. There's a half-Z here and a half-Z there. No, there's a lot more of them now. They are a people that are recognized. So Revax is kind of playing both sides. He's trying to get on well with the people in the East now. Like, hey, see, we're open up for trade. The Iron Hearts are open for business, baby. Come get a piece of the action. Meanwhile, Glacia, she is building up some defenses herself. This is where we see the cities of Sword and Shield being raised. Sword and Shield, I mean, they're both pretty aptly named, right? Doesn't really take a genius to figure that one out. Sword, due to its geographic location here between Kasich, Barlack, Blatt, it's a central point here in the infrastructure when it comes in the military infrastructure of the Empire when it comes to deploying forces into the Horseshoe Plains out to the east. So Sword is founded as more or less like a military gathering point, right? It probably was already a large military camp. And then just from there, all right, we're turning this into a large official city. It's going to be a huge crossroads. And in fact, it will continue to function as a huge imperial crossroads until the annexation of Vertiterra. This is also where the arena is, although the arena is not formed just yet. The arena will come later. Then there's also Shield. Now, Shield is strategically positioned more or less to ward off any attacks from the east. So if anyone's going to try to go north around the mountains, or even, make a treaty with the dwarves and pass through the dwarven holds, if anyone tries to do anything like that, they're going to have to go through Shield first. It's strategically placed, with the help of Glacia's freezing and everything like that, at the mouth of the mountain pass that leads up into Castle Blatt and into that whole frozen lake structure and blah blah blah, everything that it's built into. It's like, again, this is a big badass palace of Glacia that's been built and on top of itself many times over the years. Shield is now an entrance, more or less, to this huge icy mountainous complex. The Covenant, however, they are also hard at work building cities, or at least the Covenant, now as they are called. The Tharg, they move a little bit north. So, again, if we think about the current location of Rorkhold, it has now moved. So it's now abutting Lake Bump there, between Lake Bump and Mount Gomran. The Tharg found the city of Westwatch just to the north. And the point of that city is to prevent the Empire from creating any cities themselves on the lake's edge. They want to make sure that they stay in control of the lake. Because, hey, if the Empire manages to put a city on the lake, they can then surround Rorkhold by sea and besiege Rorkhold on two sides. That's not good. So they create the city of Westwatch, not to necessarily be like a striking point or a rally point, but to be a defensive point so that they can make sure that there's no Imperial fortifications that are going to be built out in Lake Bump. They use this as like also the Tharg used that area as like a live fire testing range sort of thing. Like it's considered hostile territory, but they control the city right there anyways. They consider it hostile territory, so that way they can go and attack. Again, the current colored borders that you see on the map, those are the 132 Third Era borders, not currently. Right now, the border between the Empire and the Covenant is that divide, leading over to the Tawn River and the Tucked Up Forest, and then Mount Gomran. So Westwatch, it really is built in hostile territory at this point. And then also the Covenant builds the city of Mulm, which is that's Nantes. Hang on a second. Where'd Mulm go? Oh, don't tell me that was not on the map too. Hang on a second. I know on my map it says, or sorry, in my notes it says where it is. The northern delta of the Go River, just outside the Great Dismal Swamp. Hang on a second. Northern delta of the Go River, just outside the Great Dismal Swamp. Mulm isn't on the map either. Okay, well, right there, there should be a city called Mulm. You can see, or it might just be, I might have a line over it. I'm pretty sure I don't, though. I think I might be able to see it. But there should be a city called Mulm there I'll read the description again from my notes here. The Thul create the city of Mulm at the northern delta of the Go River, just outside the Great Dismal Swamp. All right, so that's where that was. Now, this is more or less when the Second Era ends. There are, and this is also where part 2 here of this discussion is going to end, because this is when we get into a lot more of the specifics of some of these battles. You know, like when we talked about what happened in Yggdrasil, we glazed over that pretty quickly. As we go from the Second Era into the Third Era, we get into a much more nuanced approach of who's who, what's what, as we start to dive into the next 130 years with the same sort of intensity that we've been looking at the last 700 years with. But before we end today's talk, we still have one more very important thing to talk about. Why do we call it Zero Third Era? Why is it that that's when the new era starts, right? 22nd Era. Wasn't that good enough? Why do we start then? Well, I'll tell you. It's kind of the point, right? We kind of stopped last week's lore talk, or at least towards the end of it. We talked about the Freelanders, the humans that were escaping Veshta's province up to the north. After the Karlach attacked, there were still a lot of humans alive, because Veshta didn't commit many forces to fighting it. So they started to flee from her province. They started to populate this area here in the Northern Horseshoe Plains. And honestly, when we're talking about all these little kings and cities being attacked and sacked by the Empire, a lot of these little unnamed cities are these human cities that are scattered throughout this northern territory here. Or Freelanders, Jin, human. At this point, this is when they kind of become the same thing. Or I guess they all, or rather when the Jin become human. So the humans flee Veshta, and for the last 700 years or so, they've been doing their best just to get by. However, with the rise of the Empire, the Freelanders have been growing more and more corrupt, and in a lot of ways more and more culturally divided. Some embrace the slave trade. Some embrace moral debauchery. While others say, hey, you know, this is why we left the Grand Tier Peninsula, to get away from this kind of oppression, to get away from the Veshtans who were treating us as slaves. Why are you doing this, brother? Wake up. So a folk hero rises from the midst of the people, and he calls himself the Bork, right? So he gives up all of his, he was a great warrior, philosopher, king, basically. A great leader of his people. But he saw all this corruption in all of these foreign lands. But he saw that they were all brother humans as well. He didn't want to be a warmonger. He didn't want to go from one place to another and say, as a ruler, I'm conquering you, you need to do what I say now. But at the same time, how could he let his brothers commit such atrocities against his brothers? He is at an impasse, as is often the case with the Bork. They are usually created when one of these people is at a great moral impasse. So the Bork realizes, if I give up my lands, if I give up my riches, and I am nothing but a moral and martial leader, like that might be the only way. So he basically says to his people, look, I'm renouncing my kingship, and I'm becoming this moral leader, points to his regent and says, this guy, or not his regent, his valet, or whatever, his assistant, and says, this guy's the king now, everybody listen to him, if you don't, I'll beat your ass. And I say, all right, cool, you're in charge. And he takes his army and he goes around to the other kings and the other small lords and the other dukes of the area. And he says, hey, you're going to listen to what I say. And if you don't change your laws so that they're like the moral laws, I tell you, if you don't get rid of your slavery, if you don't get rid of all this public indecency and all this debauchery, I'm going to kick your ass. And if they didn't listen, he would kick their ass. And he basically did that. The Bork just kind of went around from one little village, one little duchy, one little kingdom to another, all throughout the Horseshoe Plains there, kicking ass and taking names until he'd unified basically all of the human tribes in the north. So now it wasn't just all of these weirdo humans who left Veshta with no leader, just ripe for the picking, being taken one by one and ransacked by these imperial forces. No, now they were Freelanders, and they weren't just Freelanders, sorry. Now they were the Bictoral. Translated, that means protected by Bork. So the Bictoral, they are the Bork's people. The people who are protected by his moral law. He put in place, once he unified all of these different places, all these different tribes of humans, he put in place an oligarchical structure made up of those different tribal leaders that he'd cowed, because he didn't kill anybody, right? Again, he just kicked ass until they surrendered or, said, okay, fine, I'll listen. But whatever. In one case or another, he got them all on board. So he puts in place an oligarchical structure and a council that more or less oversees the execution of law and diplomacy. But as far as the execution of moral law, that's the territory of the Bork. It's a little bit of a complicated system, right? But basically, he created a council of 10 representatives that serve the common good, and he sits more or less at the top of that council as a sort of regulatory body. He has like his own like palace, but he doesn't have any territory, right? He can call upon the armies to do good, but he doesn't have like a private army. It's this really weird sort of position. But he's the Bork. He's more or less like the founding father kind of thing. That council also that oversees the area, they are called the Bellhold. The Bellhold is also what the land is more or less called. Hey, if you are, if your area is represented by one of the councils of the Bork, or if your area is represented by one of the councils on the Bellhold, then the area is part of the Bellhold. The Bork have kind of a lot of overlapping terms, so a lot of these people do. But one more time at the end, just to be clear about it here, the Bork, he's the leader of the people, a moral leader, more or less. The Bellhold is the council that oversees the Bellhold, and the people themselves are called the Bictoral. He passes on. He dies in 0 Third Era. And the council, the Bellhold, appointed one of their own to serve as the next Bork. That Bork gave up their lands, they gave up their holdings, they assumed the title of the Bork, and so the story continues. So the Bork is not one single person. It's like a dynastic title. But the spirit of the Bork is something that you inherit. It's like the Dalai Lama, right? It's not like inheritance passing from one person to another. But when the second Bork took power over the Bellhold, that's 0 Third Era. So the Third Era starts when the first Bork dies, and the second Bork, the Bork by law, right? Not by beating people in the face, but the Bork by law, that's when they take over. And that is also, that's when the Third Era starts. That's when they take over, and that's also when we're going to be concluding the lore chat for now. So it's a little bit longer, but We kind of got now into a little bit more of the particulars. Part 1 was about that first conflict in peace. Now we're starting to talk about the heating up of the war again. Yggdrasil has been sacked, and the Kaiken camp has been wiped off the map. Glacia's attack on Manalo ultimately failed, and it seems like Revax is starting to play both sides. Meanwhile, the Covenant's building up their power, and the Bond of the Rising Sun has proven itself a success. So, things are definitely starting to heat up on both sides, and it's still anyone's guess at this point in history what is going to happen next, or who could be drawn in next. There's still those Sonar that are sitting by the sidelines. They practice slavery, but they also aren't being militant at all like the Empire is. So, like, what's going on with them? In fact, they appear to be more mercantile. So they, again, kind of trying to play both sides. And the dwarves, they are just digging into the mountain and defensively not really picking a side. In fact, selling arms to both sides. So, it could go any which way right now. There's still a lot of forces that haven't thrown their hat in the ring one way or another. We've gotten a little ways to go here before we enter true total war. And Vesta, too, has still just been sitting back. I mean, obviously, she sits on the side of the authoritarians, but she hasn't really done much, unlike Glacia, unlike Revax. She's just been chilling. Get it? All right. Well, that is where we'll end the call, or the chat for today. For part 3, we'll start to talk about the rise of humanity, and also kind of some shifting that starts to happen in serpent culture as well, as attitudes about fire snakes aren't going to be positive forever. And we'll also see the Glacian Empire rise to an even greater status, an even greater threatening posture in a maneuver that won't be repeated again for about 100 years, but one that is probably their most effective way of annexing new territory. We'll talk about that during the next Lord Chat. I hope everybody can make it.